I have 4 oral presentations for the next session before we break for lunch. These were all papers that were blind reviewed, reviewed by peers, and we selected 4 for oral, and the remainder will be in the poster session, which will happen after lunch. Each paper has 15 minutes for presentation, leaving 5 minutes for question and answers. If you are a oral presentation presenter, and I haven't talked to you, you will see these, and they will get increasingly hand-wavy as time goes down. One of my colleague Wendy suggested, she's like, in other fields what we do is, they actually play rainforest sounds with 5 minutes to go, and then it increases to like different levels of birds that are increasingly aggressive. So I thought, Isabel's actually using my computer right now, but I thought maybe for the other people, let's just try it out and see if this will catch on in NLP. in addition to these, so without further ado, I'd like to invite Isabel Clark to the stage to talk about dimensions of abusive language on Twitter.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so my name's Isabel Clark and I'm a first-year PhD student based in the Centre for Forensic Linguistics at Aston University. So one of the fundamental problems that we are all experiencing is that abusive language varies. There is no one single style or linguistic feature which accounts for all of abusive language online. Therefore, the aim of this research is to understand more generally how the structure of language varies for abusive language on Twitter. Now, one method used to examine how the structure of language varies according to its communicative purpose is multi-dimensional analysis. Now, typically, multi-dimensional analysis takes the relative frequencies of a variety of lexical and grammatical features from numerous texts in a language variety and subjects them to a factor analysis. Now, the factor analysis identifies patterns of correlating and co-occurring linguistic features and essentially groups these features into distinct stylistic dimensions. These are then interpreted for their functional properties. Now, due to the method's reliance on relative frequencies, standard multidimensional analysis cannot deal with short text such as tweets. And this is because the relative frequencies of features in short text tend to be unreliable. Therefore, we introduce a new form of multidimensional analysis, which is based on a multiple correspondence analysis of the simple occurrence of a variety of lexical and grammatical forms. In other words, rather than take the relative frequencies of features, we simply look for whether or not the feature occurs, i.e. is it present or is it absent? And then rather than use a factor analysis, which is used for continuous data, we use multiple correspondence analysis, which is similar but is used for categorical data. So our analysis focuses on Wasim and Hovey's coded data set of racist and sexist tweets. Now, following extraction of the tweets via the tweet IDs, we tagged each of the tweets using a Twitter part of speech tagger developed by Gimple and colleagues. Now, following tagging, we then automatically identified the occurrence of 81 linguistic features. Now, the features used in this research are based on the core set of features used in traditional multidimensional analysis studies. These features include tense and aspect markers, time and place adverbials, pronouns, question forms, and so on. But, and as is generally the case with most studies employing multidimensional analysis, we also included features related to the language variety under investigation. And so we included features related to computer-mediated communication, as well as Twitter-specific features, and other features related to abusive language, such as imperatives or superlatives and comparatives. Now, this program that we did resulted in an 81 feature by 1,486 tweet categorical data matrix, and then subsequently multiple correspondence analysis was performed on this data matrix. Now, multiple correspondence analysis is essentially a dimension reduction method, which aims to represent high dimensional categorical data into a low dimensional space. And it does this by searching for patterns of co-occurring linguistic features. And then based on these linguistic features, the multiple correspondence analysis assigns each category of a linguistic feature a positive or negative coordinate, as well as a value indicating its contribution to the dimension. So essentially, the multiple correspondence analysis reveals which of the linguistic features are most strongly contributing to the dimension, and then these are interpreted for their functional properties. The multiple correspondence analysis also assigns each tweet a positive or negative coordinate, and then these can be plotted in order to visualise the relationship between tweets. So the results then. Now, the multiple correspondence analysis was used to extract 4 dimensions of linguistic variation, and this is because they were readily interpretable and the remaining dimensions explained a limited amount of variance. Now, as I've already mentioned, most typical studies employing multidimensional analysis take the relative frequencies of features. And now this is not only a way to work out how often a feature occurs, but it's also a way to control for the different text lengths. But because I did not take the relative frequencies of features, but simply looked for whether or not the feature occurs, there is this potential problem that the text will be classified by length. And so in order to test whether the text length has confounded our analysis, we correlated each tweet's dimension coordinates to the length of text. And this revealed that in fact dimension 1 was strongly positively correlated to text length, dimension 2 was only moderately negatively correlated, and dimension 3 and 4 were only weakly correlated. And this strong correlation is actually reflected in the linguistic features. I apologise for the smallness of it, but the linguistic features which are most strongly contributing to the dimension. So as you can see, those features with positive coordinates are all the presence of features, and thus corresponding to that positive correlation, whereas those features with negative coordinates are the absence of features. And so essentially, as you take away a word, you're taking away a feature, and so this really does correspond to text length. So for that reason, we excluded dimension 1 from further analysis, because it essentially controls for text length. So moving on to dimension 2. Now those features with positive coordinates which are strongly contributing to dimension 2 appear to have an interactive function. So we have question mark, question do, WH words and initial do, which all indicate that a question is being asked. And now these features co-occur with second and first person pronouns, and they're used to involve the reader and writer into the discourse. And here are some examples, and then we also have hashtags which are used to interact with a feed, and therefore it's very interactive, and interjections are inherently interactive because they are immediate responses to stimuli. And so here are some examples of tweets which are strongly associated to this dimension. I apologise for any of the abusive tweets anyway, but so you can see we've got the do and you and second person pronouns, and all of these tweets are interacting with particular individuals, i.e. through the second person pronoun, or they're interacting with the hashtag. But alternatively, those features with negative coordinates, which are strongly contributing to dimension 2, have less of an interactive function and appear to function to be packing in lots of information. So we have the existential there, which is used to introduce things or statements. We also have place adverbials, quantifiers, numerals, proper nouns, nominalizations, prepositions. All of these features are associated with informationally dense tweets. And here are some examples of tweets which are also strongly associated to this dimension. All of these tweets pack in lots of information, and I've highlighted a few of the features there. So we've got the existential there, and lots of nouns and proper nouns, and nominalizations really are associated with informationally dense tweets. So overall then, dimension 2 represents the degree of interactivity exhibited by a tweet. And previous studies have found, employing multidimensional analysis studies, have found a similar initial dimension. And this is because it reflects the basic functions of language, which is to inform and to interact. And so moving on to dimension 3. Now those features with positive coordinates, which are strongly contributing to dimension 3, have an antagonistic function. So we have question features such as question do, question mark, initial do and initial verbs indicating that a question is being asked. But then we have the presence of second person pronouns, but the absence of first and third person pronouns. Now these indicate that questions are not only being asked, but they're being targeted to particular individuals by this absence of first and third person pronouns. We also have features indicating a high degree of specificity, such as nominalizations. Now a high degree of specificity and question features are indicative of a challenging function. For example, cross-examination questions are typically loaded with high amounts of specificity, and they function in order to challenge the witness in order to eventually discredit their statement. So there really is this hostile nature behind these linguistic features. And so here are some examples of tweets which are strongly associated to this dimension. All of these tweets contain questions which are antagonistically directed to other users. So we have the first one that reads, can you be legally forced into parental obligations? Can your genitals be cut at birth? Does your right to vote have an asterisk? And the second one, if being pro-due process makes you pro-rape, does being anti-death penalty make you pro-murder? So all of these questions are really antagonistically directed to other people. Alternatively then, those features with negative coordinates, which are strongly contributing to dimension 3, have less of an antagonistic function and appear to be more conciliatory and collaborative. Obviously, abusive language is by nature antagonistic, but the absence of second-person pronouns and the presence of third and first-person pronouns suggests that these tweets aren't necessarily targeted to particular individuals, but are rather forming a particular, they're inclusive. And then we have other features such as the progressive tense, which is used to refer to continuing action, and then verbs of perception, which suggests that some people are perceiving the action of others. And so here are some examples of tweets which are strongly associated to this dimension. All of these tweets represent an us versus them dichotomy. So particularly the actions of them are being perceived by us, or the actions of them are influencing us. And so, for example, the first one reads, I saw him, but I rarely engage with male femmes, 0 point to it, they are just following orders. The second one, I actually wish they would just start using egalitarian so we could let feminist mean misandrist hypocrites. So overall then, dimension 3 is interpreted as representing the degree of antagonism exhibited by a tweet. Now, previous studies examining trolling and other forms of abusive language have noted this antagonistic nature of the particular posts. So moving on to the fourth and final dimension. Now, those features with positive coordinates, which are strongly contributing to dimension 4, appear to be functioning to express attitudinal judgment. So we have be as a main verb and predicative adjectives, which are used to identify a characteristic or attribute of a subject-noun phrase. We also have comparatives, which are used to describe or encode one's own judgment that something is better or worse or more or less than something else. And then these features co-occurring with first-person pronouns indicates that perhaps a personal opinion is being expressed. And so here are some examples of tweets which are also strongly associated to this dimension. All of these tweets contain personal opinions. Now I'm going to move on because I'm running out of time here. Quickly to the last, to those features with negative coordinates, which are strongly contributing to the dimension, have less or appear to be less to be expressing attitudinal judgment, but have more of a reportive function. So we have public verbs, which are used to report on someone else's speech. Progressive tense and perfect tense used to refer to continuing action and whether that's still affecting or influencing the present. And then past tense as well to report on this. We also have both passive constructions contributing to this dimension, and passive constructions are associated with ideological discourse, often because the agent is removed from the sentence altogether, or the agent is given a particular prominence within a sentence. And then we have now these ideological features co-occurring with URLs and numerals also suggest that perhaps a particular point is being supported either through additional textual information, i.e. through the URL, or through quantitative information through the numbers. And so here are some examples of tweets which are also strongly associated to this dimension. All of these features are reporting on particular actions and are supporting this with either additional textual or URL information. So we have the first one, the Jews are trying to defend themselves against Muslims trying to exterminate them. And then we have a supportive article as well, which leads them on to try and support that. And then the second, in Islam, women must be locked in their houses and Muslims claim this is treating them well. And again, an additional reference to another one. So overall then, dimension 4 is represented as the degree of attitudinal judgment exhibited by a tweet. Now obviously abusive language is by nature attitudinal and ideological. However, Van Dyck has previously referred to that such beliefs can be encoded in various ways, either through explicit opinions, such as those features with the positive coordinates, or by telling stories. And so this reporting function of the bottom side of the tweets really did lead this. So dimension 4 therefore represents the ways in which these ideological beliefs are encoded. So then we then decided to test whether there are any functional differences between racist and sexist tweets in respect to the dimensions. In particular, we used a Wilcoxon signed rank test and box plots in order to visualise the relationships. And this revealed that in fact there was a significant difference between racist and sexist tweets with respect to dimensions 2 and dimensions 4, with sexist tweets being more interactive and attitudinal than racist tweets. And so to conclude then, we have introduced a novel form of multi-dimensional analysis and have revealed 3 dimensions of linguistic variation in this corpus of racist and sexist tweets. Although there is no absolute distinction, we have revealed that racist tweets and sexist tweets do tend to differ functionally tend to differ, most notably with sexist tweets being more interactive and attitudinal than racist tweets. Most notably, however, we have demonstrated that abusive language can be less targeted and antagonistic and actually appear to be more conciliatory and collaborative, and through this us versus them dichotomy, which could mean that such classifiers may not pick up on that sort of abusive language. Fundamentally, we did not rely on profanity, but these dimensions are subject to change with more data, as we only did analyse 1,468 tweets. And so future research will be working on ways to collect larger corpora of both abusive and non-abusive tweets in order to see how both of these differ and functionally. So thank you very much.
All right, we have time for a few questions. We did start a little later. I'm going to try to not just back into the correct time frame, but please, if you have any questions, raise your hand. Yes.
Hi. Many of the features will be picked up also in just normal discussion. What is your negative class? So what are your non-abusive tweets?
We didn't analyse non-abusive tweets, so we only worked on this corpus, and obviously that is something that we aim to do in the future, because yes, you're absolutely right. Functionally, lots of these features co-occur within ordinary conversation, but we were really focused on that. But eventually we'll collect this huge corpus of general tweets, plot the abusive ones on there in order to see where the abusive tweets fall in respect to non-abusive tweets, to perhaps determine whether or where they do fall. But I think the highlight of our research is that we found that racist and sexist tweets do differ functionally in respect to some of the dimensions. So I think that was our core aim as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I had the Trump Twitter archive open and was testing some of the linguistic features that you were identifying, and they were getting lots of hits. So
Good.
Sharing. As a data set.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Anyone else? One really, who won? All right. I'm going back there that way. All right. One really good question, please.
Given that you don't have a negative class, wouldn't a feature that always occur, for example, a feature that just picks up if there is a word like "the," wouldn't that turn out to be particularly important because it is there in every tweet, right?
Yes, well, not always. Some tweets don't contain articles or determiners,
right,
but
going
collectively, it's not just one single feature; it's the whole features together, because collectively they function all as one. They make a whole function together.
Right. Is it not the case that you identify features that are always or are never there in the abusive tweets, in fact? But these features could also be always there in non-abusive tweets as the previous
Yeah,
question.
no, and I do agree with that, but aren't all other classifiers trained on certain linguistic features that occur within non-abusive tweets as well?
Okay, maybe we can.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's thank our speaker.
Okay.
Take it away, yeah.
Okay. So my name is Varada Kolhatkar. I'm a postdoc with Maite Taboada at Simon Fraser University, which is near Vancouver, if you haven't seen it yet. So today I'm going to talk about constructive language in news comments. So to begin with, I'm going to show you two comments on an article written by Mary Hennen on Hillary Clinton's loss in the presidential election. So I'm going to give you some time to read the comments, and then I'm going to ask you, which comment do you think is more constructive? Yeah, doesn't? Okay. So how many of you think the comment in yellow is more constructive? Okay, that's good. And how many of you think the comment in blue is constructive? Okay, so that more or less agrees with my annotation. And my analysis here is that, so both these comments, they disagree with the article. But the comment in blue, it does it dismissively. So it basically says that this article is so bad that it's not even worth debating. And on the other hand, this comment in yellow, it says that, so it considers the article as a genuine starting point, and it says that, okay, I have read the article, I understand the author's point of view, but I disagree, and here are the reasons. Right? So in this case, we more or less agreed on this notion of constructiveness, and this is the problem we want to study more systematically. So in this talk, we are going to focus on these three research questions. The first one is, what is constructive? To what extent people agree on this notion of constructiveness? Then second, do constructive comments tend to contain linguistic cues that are common in argumentative texts? Because the assumption is that argumentative, so good comments will have good argumentation in them. And finally, what is the relation between toxicity and constructiveness? So before I go into the research questions, so why does it matter? So most of us read New York Times, and you might have seen these three things in New York Times comments. So there are these all comments, readers' picks, and New York Times picks, right? So if we have a computational system that that tells you which comments are constructive and which are not, then so these New York Times picks are these most informative and most constructive comments, and then so New York Times, they organize these their comments based on that. So they put New York Times picks at the top, and you can see all the informative comments. So this is one of the applications where our work can be useful. So first research question, what is constructive? So what we did was we put this question on SurveyMonkey, and then we asked people what do they think about constructiveness in the context of news comments. And here are the important points from this survey. So first thing is that they should create a civil dialogue through remarks that are relevant to the article. Then the second thing was that they are not primarily intended to provoke an emotional response. Then they are typically targeted to specific points, and then they are usually supported by evidence. So these were the important things from this survey. The next thing we wanted to do was we wanted to see to what extent people agree on this notion of constructiveness, right? So we created this raw corpus from a Canadian daily, the Globe and Mail. So we randomly picked 1,121 comments from a variety of, on articles from a variety of topics. Okay, now that we have this raw corpus and we have some definition of constructiveness, we created our annotation guidelines, and we asked the crowd what do they think about constructiveness for these news comments, right? So for crowdsourcing, we used Crowdflower as our interface, and here is how our interface looks like. So we show the headline of the article, we give the link for the article, and then we show the comment. And then we ask the annotators, we asked the annotators whether they think the comment is constructive, non-constructive, or whether they are not sure, right? So we asked for 3 annotators per comment, and our percentage agreement on a sample given by Crowdflower was 87.88%, which was kind of impressive for this task. So if you are curious what annotators said in this particular case, so they thought, all of them thought this comment was not constructive. Okay, so we have this constructiveness corpus, which is rather small. And then so next thing we wanted to try was build a computational system for constructiveness. So again, so there is no annotated data for constructiveness at a comment level. And so we wanted, and our data was not big enough for training. So what we did was we explored other available corpora. So the first corpus we explored was Yahoo News annotation comments corpus. Now this corpus has many interesting annotations, but the most relevant for us was this constructiveness, thread constructiveness annotation. So this corpus doesn't have annotation per comment for constructiveness, but they have annotated constructive threads. So this was not exactly suitable for our task. So what we did was we assumed that if a comment occurs in a constructive thread, then it is constructive, and if it occurs in a non-constructive thread, then it is non-constructive. So so for us, we are interested in constructiveness of individual comment, because we think that so we want to be able to classify a comment as it comes in instead of waiting for the whole thread to develop. Then the second corpus we explored was this argument extraction corpus. So this corpus has, so it contains sentences from different topics, debates on different topics such as gun control, gay marriage, evolution, and death penalty. And each sentence is annotated with argument quality, right? So our intuition here was that constructive comments will have some linguistic cues that are present in good argumentative texts. Okay, so we have these 2 corpora, which are kind of noisy for our task, but so we have enough training data. So like everybody else does, we build bidirectional LSTM, and we used TF-Learn and TensorFlow. It was off-the-shelf implementation, so we didn't engineer a lot with this model. But then here are the results. We carried out a few experiments, 3 experiments mainly, and then on the x-axis we show all the corpora, all different corpora combinations, and y-axis we have accuracy. Then our baseline was random baseline, and blue bars show validation results and green bars show test results. Okay, so here first thing what we see in these results is that even with this noisy data and off-the-shelf LSTM bidirectional LSTM implementation, we get reasonable accuracy in identifying constructive and non-constructive comments, like 73% 98% was our best accuracy. And and the second thing we see here is whenever we had this Yahoo News annotation comments corpus, the results were better. And whenever we added argument extraction corpus, the results went down. So one reason is, I guess, just that. So this data is not really representative of what we are trying to do. The next thing we did was we examined association between argumentation features and constructiveness. So we present this association in terms of odds ratio, and what this numbers means is that, so in this case, odds ratio is 3.49. That means that for argumentative discourse relation, that means that constructive comments are 3.49 times more likely to contain argumentative discourse relations than non-constructive comments, right? So when we did this association, then what we found was that all these well-known linguistic indicators of argumentation, like argumentative discourse relations such as cause comparison, then stance adverbials and reasoning verbs and modals, so they showed strong association with constructiveness. Okay, now the next thing is, which is relevant for this workshop, is what is the relationship between toxicity and constructiveness, right? So so we all know that when it comes to online content, there is a lot of toxicity, and many newspapers, they are closing down their comment section because they cannot deal this. It's a full-time job to moderate all comments. Right, so in the Canadian context, Toronto Star closed its commenting section 2 years ago, I think, and then CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, they closed commenting on Aboriginal or Indigenous people related stories because, so they, like you say, see the descriptions here. Unique situation when it comes to Indigenous related stories because they get disproportionate number of comments that cross the line and violate our guidelines. So in our context, what we were interested in examining was what is the relationship between toxicity and constructiveness. So in particular, we wanted to ask this question: are non-constructive comments more likely to be toxic compared to constructive comments? Right? So for that, what we did was we added one more layer of annotation in our constructiveness corpus. So we defined 4 levels of toxicity: non-toxic, mildly toxic, toxic, and very toxic, right? And we asked annotators, again crowd annotators, to annotate our comments for toxicity. And here is what we found. So here I'm showing you distribution of toxicity levels for constructive and non-constructive texts. Okay, so in general, so the green means non-toxic, and in our data, what we saw was most of the comments were non-toxic. And this is just because, I guess, so this was Canadian newspaper, and Canadians are nice people. But no, I mean, the real reason is that these were moderated comments. We couldn't get access to really toxic comments, right? So that's why most of the comments were non-toxic. And one thing we see here is there is no striking difference in the distribution of toxicity level between constructive and non-constructive comments, right? So, I mean, our intuition before was that non-constructive comments will be more toxic than constructive comments, but we didn't see that in our data. So to visualize that in a different way, so if this red circle is, if it represents all toxic space on the web, and this green circle is our constructive comments, and blue circle is our non-constructive comments. So we saw that many non-constructive comments were non-toxic, but we saw that there were some constructive comments that were toxic, which raises this question whether you want to filter all toxic comments or not, right? So maybe it's okay to have an aggressive debate as long as it's constructive. Okay, so to conclude, we gave a definition of constructiveness, and we observed in our data that the crowd more or less agrees on the notion of constructiveness. Second, we demonstrated the feasibility of identifying constructive comments automatically. Then third, we showed that well-known linguistic indicators of argumentation show strong association with constructiveness. And finally, we saw that some constructive comments in our data, they were toxic, which raises this question about whether to filter all toxic comments or not. And that's the end of my talk, and I'm happy to take questions.
Hi, great talk, thanks. One question about your last experiment. You said that the comments were moderated, right? Does this mean that people tried to filter out the toxic comments so that the toxic comments that you saw were just those that escaped the attention of the moderators? Because if that's the case, I don't see how you can conclude anything about toxic comments.
In this data? Yeah, I mean, so yeah, that's a good question. So these were moderated by Globe and Mail. And yeah, we tried to contact them and ask them how they do it, but it is manual.
Did they try to filter out toxic comments or some other kind of?
No, I mean, we are assuming they don't give much information, but we are assuming that they filter most of the toxic and abusive comments.
So how can you conclude anything about toxic comments?
Right, but I mean, I think, but still there are like many comments, right? And so that's what we wanted to see. So we asked people to annotate what is the toxicity level. And some of them, I mean, the percentage is very tiny. Like in constructive comments, 0.49 of the total 603 instances were toxic. So it's really tiny, but there were some people thought that they were very toxic.
I think I also had sort of a question on that. I'll say this real quickly, that this is sort of, these results are based on this post-moderation, right? And so this is really reflective of like whatever their moderation was doing.
Yeah.
And I think this sort of ties in what Lucas was saying earlier, is that, or someone was saying this, that, you know, it really depends when you get the data. Like even when we made the YNAT corpus, some of that stuff had already been moderated. And even that's like has a lot of toxicity in that. So, I mean, to do this experiment, I might suggest, well, if you're in a rush, maybe use the YNAC stuff, because I think that definitely has the threshold for toxicity. They're a little bit more lenient, so you're going to get a graph, the pie chart that looks a bit different, which is, I think, what we all be looking for.
Right.
The other thing is maybe talk to Lucas and look at like what Reddit does and capture things online, and I think you get that sort of like difference in distribution. I have another suggestion real quick, is that in the beginning of the talk, when you use the YNAC corpus, and when Courtney and I did that, I know you're sort of projecting the labels back, saying if this thread is constructive, then every comment is constructive.
Right.
And that's definitely not the case every comment, as you probably saw. So I would suggest, if you're going to repeat the experiment, we also have these comment level things, and there's some negative labels, negative attributes of comments, and positive ones. I'd sort of map those constructive and non-constructive.
I see.
Because we really want to have, you can have a constructive conversation, and some people can be a little bit snarky, but overall the thread is constructive. So maybe 80%, I think in some cases maybe like 70% were generally good, but there might be like 20 to 30 that weren't that good, but it didn't matter too much.
Right.
But that might actually, it might make your classifier look better too.
Yeah, so actually now we are trying, I mean, we did different experiments so our representative constructiveness class was New York Times Picks. And we are finding that is better representation of constructiveness. But yeah, thank you for your suggestions.
Hi.
Hi.
So your problem is much difficult than toxicity, right? Because it depends on the actual article. You can have a comment that is non-constructive from an article and is constructive for another. But did you feed the actual article to the LSTM?
No. So LSTM didn't have any knowledge of the article. It just had that particular comment.
Mm-hmm. It could be interesting.
But yeah.
I mean, it will be
that's
perhaps
definitely,
difficult.
Yeah, thank you.
Similarly, I just wanted to ask if you distinguish between comments that are new comments versus comments that are replied to other comments, and if that makes a difference.
So we want to experiment with that. In these results, we didn't do any experiments with that. Yeah, but actually in this particular setting because we didn't want to go in thread, so we considered only top level comments.
Thank you for your work and your talk. You had the sort of opening question of can we understand the relationship between constructiveness and toxicity, which I think is a super critical question, and if we could solve that, we might solve a lot of things. I wonder if you have any thoughts, having gotten this far, on how you might answer that question about the relationship between constructivity and toxicity.
So in terms of filtering or in general, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sort of, what are your insights having done this now?
Yeah, so I think, so like other people mentioned, so this is on moderated comments, so I mean, these results are there, but I think we need to do more to see whether, to confirm this result. We need to do more experiments on bigger data sets and where there are actual toxic comments. So, I mean, I will be so yeah, so these are results, some basic results, but we need to do more to understand the relationship.
All right, I think sadly that's all the time we have. Let's thank our speaker again. Thank you, Varada.